Hello, welcome to American Baker in Germany. I'm Michelle, and today we are doing some more baking basics. Today we are learning how to make pie crust in order to prepare for Thanksgiving. So let's get started.
The ingredients for the pie crust are really simple. We need flour, 2 cups of flour for a double crust pastry, so that is about 250 grams of flour. And we need 2/3 a cup of butter, or about 160 grams. I use butter. I have also used shortening or margarine for this recipe, whichever you prefer. Butter has a slightly stronger, pleasant, buttery taste. Most recipes call for shortening, which will make it slightly more stable, but also kind of tasteless. But there's not tons of flavor in pie crust anyway, so it doesn't make a huge difference. I'm also using a dash of salt, and we're using some water. I'm not going to use all of this. This is kind of full. I'm going to put it in by the tablespoon or so, and I'll show you how to check the consistency until it comes together. A lot of people are intimidated by pie crust. They're afraid to make it. They think it's going to break apart or it's not going to look right. And that's possible, but honestly, it's not that hard to make. Other things you need besides the ingredients are pie plates. I'm actually using 2 different kinds of pie plates. This is a regular pie plate. You can see how shallow this is. It's not very deep, and you can see the slanted sides to it. I also have this one, however. This is actually a 9-inch round cake pan. This is a great substitute if you can't find an actual pie plate. The difference is that it's just a bit deeper, and the sides are much steeper. Those are the only differences. It works just as well for pies, especially if you like a lot of filling, because it holds a bit more filling than the traditional pie plate. I'm making 2 different pies today that will each take a single crust pastry. But if you are making a pie that also takes a top crust, this recipe will only be enough for 1. You also need a rolling pin. You can use any kind of rolling pin, whichever kind you like the best. You also need a bowl of some sort, and I do not have a pastry cutter, so I am using 2 knives today to cut in the butter and fluff in the water with a fork. I will show you how to do that. You don't need any special equipment for this. So let's put it all together. I add 2 cups or 250 grams of flour to my bowl. Then I add a dash of salt. This package is 250 grams of butter, which is just over a cup. I cut it to use about 2/3 of a cup or 160 grams of butter. Now I'm going to take my 2 knives and literally cut the butter into small chunks. Basically as small as I can get them with 2 knives. When I'm finished cutting the butter, it should resemble coarse crumbs. Something like this. Now I'm going to add the water, a tablespoon or 2 at a time. There we go. Then I fluff it with a fork. Here's what it looks like now. It's obviously still too dry, so I add another tablespoon or 2 of water and continue fluffing with a fork. Now this is starting to come together. I add another tablespoon of water and fluff it a bit more. Here's what the dough should be looking like. That's just about perfect, but it's just a bit of a crumbly texture. To counteract that, I do something most books tell you never to do. I'm going to knead the dough for just a minute or 2. Kneading activates the gluten in flour. It will make your dough more elastic. If you knead it for a long time, your pie crust will be very chewy. But if you don't knead it at all, it will be difficult to roll out because it's not going to want to stick together. What you want to do is just knead it for a minute, no more than 2. Once it starts holding together better, you can stop kneading. I split the dough into 2 pieces and roll out one at a time. To roll out the dough, you first spread quite a bit of flour onto your surface. Press the dough into the flour, making sure both sides of the dough get flour. You need this because sometimes there's a bit of butter that didn't get incorporated in the dough completely, which will make it stick to the counter pretty badly. Roll some flour onto the rolling pin as well, and roll out the dough. If it gets a bit sticky, just spread a bit more flour on it. Just a warning, however, do not try to pick it up and flip it around while rolling it out. This is not pizza dough. It's quite crumbly and will fall apart on you. Don't try to pick it up until you're done rolling it out and ready to place it on the pie plate. An effective way to pick it up without making it crumble in your hands is to fold it into fourths, and then pick up the whole thing, centering the corner in the middle of the pie plate and gently unfolding the pie crust. Then press it into the pie plate and trim off the excess pie crust dough. Then, using my fork, cut a few breathing holes in the pie crust to allow the crust to bake through properly. This one went very smoothly. For a couple things that can go wrong, watch the second pie crust. If you want to make some simple decorations out of your leftover pie crust, you can. Just be aware that the more often you roll out pie crust, the stiffer the dough, and the more difficult it becomes to roll out. Try not to do it more than once if you can avoid it. I cut a handful of maple leaves out of my leftover pie crust and set them aside for when my pies are full of filling. I roll out my second amount of pie crust on a freshly floured surface. One side of my pie crust stuck to the counter almost immediately. So I begin on that side and use a butter knife to scrape the dough away from the counter. It makes it look funny on the underside, but is quite an effective way to pick up pie crust. Then I laid the pie crust in my pie plate. There was a rip on one side and a hole in the crust on the other. I trimmed my pie crust and used the excess to fill in any gaps in the pie crust. This happens a lot, so if your pie crust tears, don't worry about it. Just press it back together and patch up with excess pie crust dough. What do I do with excess pie crust dough? I try not to roll it out again. I just pick up the excess pieces and put it on a baking tray. Then I sprinkle them with cinnamon and sugar and bake them about 10 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 Celsius. These make wonderful snacks. I hope this helps you make the perfect pie crust for your pies on Thanksgiving. See you again next time.
Yeah, I put everything together.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And then what?
And then we're gonna stir it and then we bake and then we eat it.
Is it yummy?
Maybe.
I love you, honey.